And now it's time for me to hand you over to Mark Lambswood and Mark DeBono of Cornerstone to deal with this crucial topic of what is data in learning and development. Mark, over to you.
So good morning, good afternoon actually now, just past the hour. So good afternoon, Mark DeBono here at Cornerstone. And today we're going to be discussing what data means in L&D. We'd like to really get into what your strategies are. We'll be running some polls. We want this to be as interactive as possible. You'll see that as we go through the rest of the session. Definitely feel free to communicate. This is a two-way interactive session this morning. So we're keen to get into the detail as we go through the rest of this session. So let me introduce to you who's on the call. So my responsibility here at Cornerstone, all of our amazing clients in the UK and the Middle East. I manage all of our new business acquisition. I'm ably joined by Mark Lambswood, who's responsible for all of our content business as a regional director in EMEA. And him and I will talk you through in terms of some of our tips, hints and tricks in terms of what content and data and return on investment could look like for you as an organization. So looking forward to the session. So I think just before we kick off the rest of this session, let me talk you through what the agenda is high level. So we'll be talking around data, the trends in that data, some of the areas around how to demonstrate value. We'll be doubling down really on skills analysis, internal mobility, and what that means as an organization for you. And then ultimately then some Q&A as we go through the rest of the session. So high level agenda point, we might mix and match and move left and right as we go through that, but effectively we're looking to probably get through all of that within the next 30 to 40 minutes. So looking forward to it. So before we start, we wanted to get our first poll, which I'm really keen to get your view on in terms of your challenges within L&D as you see as we enter in 2023. So I'm just going to pause there and just see what your views are in terms of what those poll challenges are. Dan, I don't know what we've got coming through.
It's very difficult in these situations because I always want to talk about what all the options are and so on, but of course you don't want to lead the audience. But you can see hopefully that we've got votes coming in, lots of participation. What are your challenges in L&D for 2023? Of course, I asked this in my survey myself. I'm very interested in the results here. Please do click on the channel. But also, if you've got something you want to say about why you've chosen a particular option, there's a big box in the middle there, poll discussion. Why did you choose to go for one of those or something else? Daphne has put in UX strategy, interestingly, and UX strategy. So user experience strategy for Daphne and Beth. It looks like we've come pretty much to an end of the poll there. 28% saying in second place, identifying missing skill needs, which is, I guess, where the data comes in. Yeah. But the biggest one, 38%, communicating the impact of L&D on the organization. So there we have the two uses of data. First is to improve what we do, identifying the skills. And the other one is to prove what we do, communicating the impact. By the way, that idea of improve and prove is a phrase of Trish Uhl in the States. Mark, what are your takes on what that says?
Mark, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so the first bit, the one for me that's interesting is the top one is communicating the impact of L&D. You can see that we've got, attendance and uptake of training from Yvonne. So that's actually perhaps going back to how can we be using data like this to communicate this impact? So I think that's really key for me. Also like to see that skills is coming up second, because of course that's what Mark will be talking about later on this morning.
Yeah, and for me, it's interesting because I see as responsible for the sales component of Cornerstone. I hear a lot about budget cuts. Obviously, we're in a fairly challenging market at the moment in terms of obvious layoffs within the market, and budgets are being cut. But I suspect budget cuts might be in there. It's probably not the number one, but it's encouraging that budget cuts, ironically, is not your main challenge for this year. Definitely pleased to see communication of L&D and the value that brings, and hopefully we'll give you some ideas and thoughts throughout the rest of this session. So interesting first part of the session.
Also very interesting what people are saying in the middle here with Yvonne and Alex agreeing that they've seen the training is there, but people aren't attending it. Now, what I'm seeing more widely is that people are very tight on time, and this is expressed in different ways. Some people say, well, we need to enhance engagement. but other people are talking about the fatigue that people have got and the difficulty they have to make time to actually do something. I think we're seeing that in the middle there. People aren't attending the training even when it's there. And then Aaron's point about communicating the impact is really good. Look, as you were saying, Mark, there's a potential tightening of budgets. We have to prove ourselves. Kim's saying the same thing. We need to promote and market to other people. Also, I think Daphne and Beth's point about UX strategy is very interesting. And I think I'd like to ask if you could answer in the general chat, because we're going to move on from this area in a second. Daphne and Beth, if you could just let us know why UX strategy is so important to you. I'd be really interested in that, because I think it's something I hadn't anticipated. There we go. There was so much more online stuff during lockdown. Why more now? I know you've got a lot of stuff to handle. We're already 11 minutes past. By the way, I have three big clocks in front of me, so I know what the time is. So shall we move on to the wider discussion? Yeah.
So why don't we pause for a moment? I'm interested to see. So first of all, thank you for the poll. I think some of the answers to the challenges within L&D in 2023 are starting to appear into the chat. But yeah, just a moment of pause around, yes, budget, and yes, apathy, yes, communication of L&D, but anything outside of that before we get into the main driving of the deck. I'll pause for 2 minutes while we see the rest of that. I mentioned obviously user experience, but yeah, we'll just pause before we move through.
Well, I think what you're asking here, aren't you, Mark, is about what the data challenges are for 2023, specifically the challenges people have got around the world of data. I'd love to know if and it may be people have no data challenges, but I'd love to know in that big box underneath the slide, what are your thoughts around your challenges with data, which another way of saying this is why, if you joined the presentation today. Is interesting also in the main chat. Kim is saying promotion and marketing of learning and development options. So I think this idea of getting information out there around what we're doing in L&D is a really common theme. People want to know people want to somehow rise above the noise of the general world, so that L&D becomes something people notice and doesn't get lost. Chris's data challenge, knowing what we really need to be collecting, measuring, and using the data for. So this is like a sort of a meta challenge, is the driving reason for it. Coming back to your point, Mark D, access to data, says Yvonne. Right, where is it? Linking the data reports for staff. And then again, this business of proving what we're doing, showing to senior leadership we're doing the right job. And Claire says, understanding what different stakeholders in the company consider to be proof of ROI.
Right. Okay. So Claire, we have something for you on that one. We can give you a good couple of examples as we go through the rest of this session. So Don, why don't we continue through them? As I say,
I can see Dan is still writing. Listen, I'm going to move on from this particular layout in a second. So I'm going to let Dan, if you could finish what you're writing in the main box, and then everyone else put their thoughts into the general chat and observations. That would be perfect.
Awesome.
Engagement. Okay. Sorry, one other point about the data. Right, we've got the linking data to initiatives, needing clear KPIs. But the other point raised by Uwe, and I think it's a really good one, is you've got different silos, and Tamara says quality and completeness of data. We've got the right points being raised by the audience, Mark and Mark. These are all valid, great data issues. Of course, you're going to solve them all in the presentation, aren't you?
We'll try to, Del. We'll try to. So, look, before we kick off, I think it's definitely would not be remiss of saying, look, it's a definite challenge. So I'll let you digest some of the information on the screen, but I definitely want to highlight that there's definitely challenges around return on investment and learning. So it's difficult, as we discussed, data's in multiple systems, it's challenging to consolidate, but the demands of data has definitely increased over the past 5 years. But the management of it has become harder, as we discussed. There's a couple of you put in the chat around, it's in multiple silos and multiple broader stakeholders outside of learning are finding it difficult to uncover and analyze. So, everybody has time pressures. We're all under pressure in terms of resources. But I think we all have to reflect and review that, practically what may have been on the agenda previously, cannot continue. We all agree that we definitely need to change how we measure ROI. I think what is clear is, look, the old adage of the old evaluation form, did you enjoy the training? Did you enjoy the course? What's that quick questionnaire is, might tell you of that learner in the moment, might look good on paper, but, we have to now move very quickly, and I think the market has moved very quickly away from that in terms of what we're doing that in practice in the workplace. So the C-suite is not interested on the excitement of the course, but they really want to understand how has that impacted workplace performance and ultimately return on investment. But there's a number of challenges. I think there's a fairly well-known cognitive scientist that says humans forget. I think 50% of this session today will be forgot by the end of the hour. I think 70% of it will be lost within the next 24 hours, and 90% of it will be lost within the next week. So taking learning and putting it into an environment, you're always challenging based on some of those data statistics from that cognitive scientist. So what we have to do is really assess more around the behavioral changes around how those learners are measured, and ultimately how they transfer that into the workplace. But I think the challenges, as say what's on the screen, is fairly clear. However, I think what we recognize here at Cornerstone is that the talent and learning leaders in the market are really in this, what we say is, and it's this incredible enviable position, which is the role has been elevated, not like no other business leader. Because I think we absolutely hold that golden thread of learning about what we're saying in terms of how to reshape the way that we work for business and the individual. We have to help every individual connect with opportunities to grow, and we have to, crucially, and that's the focus here, is connect the business goals of the organization with a broader purpose, and some of those C-suite focuses you can see are on the page here. Data is going to be key in HR going forward, and as discussed on this call, there's lots of data in different parts of the employee cycle that can help you. So such as who's being promoted, who needs to be promoted, it might be, and who needs to go and work on a gig or a project as we go through some round of redundancies, what team is underperforming, how do we manage company retention and a target of what that means in terms of L&D, who are we ready to move on due to poor performance, but providing the C-suite, the data on your employees. I think we all agree with everything that we're going through at the moment in terms of the market being slightly challenging and the industry being bullet point on the page, and I'll let you digest some of those initiatives. And 2 or 3 of them jump out to me personally around how we, and our clients also, is how we're connecting workplace impact through that purpose, engagement, and driving, as an example, how to build skills for the future. If you look at those 2 initial comments on the page, by reviewing your internal people first, what does that mean for you in terms of retention and return on investment of retention? So, the focus has come away from, rate that course out of 10 to, ultimately how your job will help you perform much more effectively. And by taking that tack, definitely helps to solve the ROI problem, and the business problem ultimately. So let's show you a couple of examples. So you have on the page 2 organizations that we know well, that have taken a real data-first strategy to deliver learning and development and creating return on investment. So Shell, obviously a well-known brand, all likely to have received those annual compliance-based cyber security questions every year from our L&D team. What Shell did, which I thought was interesting for the call, is they actually analysed the characteristics of the employee that would be susceptible to cause the incident. So they actually looked at their learning and development data. They addressed this then through that focused cyber security program that was really then laser focused on the likely perpetrator in that process. So, they therefore reduced a massive time and effort and ultimately cost away from reviewing that cyber security program across their global headcount population, which obviously is many, many hundreds of thousands of people globally. So I thought that was an interesting way things to think about what data could do in terms of some of your compliance. And then moving across to Accenture, which is a company I know well, as the exec sponsor there here at Cornerstone. They definitely have this one strategy approach at Accenture, which is how do we align business strategy and learning strategy. And the example that they talk about with Cornerstone is around that clear alignment of learning around, how can we grow revenue within this, in this example that they did around their cloud division, by the deployment of really targeted learning in a moment where they saw a good opportunity to capitalize on the market around some of their cloud investment and cloud products. So they tied business strategy with Cornerstone's learning strategy and saw a fairly marked increase in performance. At this point, it was 30%. Another story which is not on the page around data, and we've mentioned it at the start of this session around how we capture skills, is, we have a well-known organization here using Cornerstone that they learn more of a, and I need to always get this right. So they learn more about their employees a month after turning on our skills graph, which I'll talk to you around shortly, over and above the previous 5 years that they had of working that employee or that same employee within their employment history at that organization, because they were solely capturing the job profile. The employee had to complete their skills and update that, and our skills graph automatically did that for them. So although it was interesting that the AI, and we'll talk about how AI can help you, really created this environment where they very quickly could understand the skills of their employees so that they could then manage and work and create opportunities and progression for those types of individuals. So look, it's definitely something in terms of client studies and case studies to review. So I think we're now interested just to see in terms of content. We'll move into a different area now with my colleague Mark Lambswood. I'll pass it over to Mark.
So thanks, Mark. So what we do now is we start to go through just quite a specific lens. So I'll cover off some data that relates to content, so e-learning content specifically. So we start us off here with a poll, looking at the ideas around the topics that you feel are currently important to you. We'll cover some of this off in detail as we go through the presentation, but really just to see if we've got some ideas around what's important to you. If you look at things like, and I see some people coming through on things like role specifics, industry specifics, feel free to add those into the chat as well. Very often there can be some fairly wide overarching things that are familiar for all of you, but let's just have a look and see what comes through for a second.
Interested always to see that middle box being used for people to share more about why they voted a particular way. It's interesting that in the poll so far, we haven't ended it, but in the poll so far, I'm just going to start broadcasting the results now. We didn't broadcast that because I wanted people not to be led by other people, but there's a clear winner at the moment, which is role-specific content. Yeah. Most people are saying that that's the one that is important for content, and that's understandable. Some of the other ones which we know have been increasingly popular, DEIB, and also industry specific and health and wellness there being looked after as well. I can see people are about to share something in the poll discussion area.
Yeah, I can see that too.
Yeah, Vicky is saying, look, she didn't want circles, she wanted check boxes because it was well-being, leadership, and role-specific content were all important, and it might be, of course, for anybody voting that there's more than one.
Yeah,
Alex is saying the same thing across the board. We're trying to find some value in all of those. Can I ask you, Mark Lambswood, is that what you were expecting, that role-specific content would be so dominant in this survey?
Yeah, I think you probably would. I think what we do when we do research like this, we'll look at the generic areas, so something that we can put a label on. Things like the DEIB sustainability. Role-specific can become, of course, really quite specific per organization, team, and actually can cover very large buckets. So as an example, role specific is likely to include something that's very specific to an individual, but it will also then include things like soft skills. Yeah. So it can be quite broad areas, but they're difficult to contextualize in a discussion like this. As we go through the slides, we'll then start to look at some of the things that we've seen trending at that level. So we can actually go through that now into some more detail. Got some interesting comments, leadership and management there as well.
Oh, sorry, I cut people off, but there we are.
No, that's all good. Yeah, and then upskilling and reskilling debates. So Andrew's made some comments there.
Karen is flitting between boxes. So many boxes, so little time, she says. Thank you for your input on that one. Really good. I'm going to move us on here because I know we've got a lot to handle.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to look at an overarching view very quickly to contextualize why we feel we can come and talk to you about, specifically for me, content data. Mark also looking at the broader L&D data and skills. And that's because we really are looking at a large amount of data. Everything we talk about here is, I completely understand would be with our lens. So here I'm looking at a lens of what are we doing in the content world? Cornerstone today produces its own content and also is reselling partner content. So many of the great content partners that you already know. The big piece of data for me is we look at data from over 100 million users. So that starts to give us a really clear view on not just the courses consumed and those completion rates, some of those old metrics. We can start to look at analyzing some of the topics and trends that we see being really popular. For, I guess, probably the last year's worth of webinars, we've been talking about that spike from COVID, the pandemic. What did we see going on there? And how was that interacting with online learning? What it enables us to do is it enables us to make sure that we're offering a good product, a product that is fit for purpose and is matching the needs that we see broadly coming up from all areas of businesses. So with 100 million users, it starts to put some context on, we can analyze the data through lots of lenses. I could look at it from a particular industry perspective, or as Mark and I would often do, we might be looking at it for a particular customer working in a region. What's trending in the UK? My team also look after all of Europe. So, we can look into other countries, other regions. We also pick up some work for our colleagues in APJ. What that's doing is it's giving me a sense of purpose that I can understand what's going on in a region. I look at it globally, what happens in the Americas, and then start to compare that with what I see trending today in Europe. So we do know that lots of things have changed. I feel like I'm probably quoting the obvious, but we are beginning to see companies, evolving really rapidly. What happened along the way is that expectations of our learners have changed. So we know that in the world that I'm working in the world of e-learning content, it's about making sure that we give people access to content on demand and it appears in the flow of work. Everybody started to get really very specific on making sure that it was personalized. People's expectations of what they wanted you as organizations to offer massively shifted. We also know that really good learning content, and I think I saw a comment around retention from Claire earlier on, when you start to look at how can we retain people better, one of the ways is to really start to limit burnout. So we want to make sure that we're keeping people motivated, engaged. One way we do that is we develop those people or we make great content available to them. So it's making sure that we find a way to use content within the world of L&D to be able to make sure that we show people that we care, that we want to develop them, and that we want things like health and wellness content to keep them happy, to keep them safe. We also know that everybody can see what's going on in your organization. So your talent brands are now, they're widely available. If I'm coming to talk to you, I can perhaps look up and see what's going on in one of your organizations. It gives me a different view than I might see when I'm in a customer meeting, because I'm hearing from the employees. But this means now that we all know what's going on in our organizations. We want that culture of inclusion and belonging. And one of the ways we do that is we start to look at how we can recruit, we can retain, and we can innovate, particularly with a particularly strong talent brand. I think now we move into a poll. We wanted to keep this as interactive as possible. But what we're looking at here is understanding, how do you today demonstrate value with your content library or the content resources that you have? You've got there, you're looking at completions, registrations, skill gap reductions, perhaps putting your hand up and admitting that you don't do that right now. But then also user engagement and behavior. So what I would call the soft analysis. So we'll just let that run in the background for a second and see what we get through. And then I'm going to come back to looking at some of the trends that in the content world today we've seen trending, and just to share our view on those things. And you won't be not surprised that much of what you'd answered earlier is going to come forward in that next slide.
Yeah, I wouldn't want people to feel they have to say they're vigorously demonstrating value. I think for a lot of people, it is something that doesn't happen at all. Or the metric is completion. So I'm not very surprised that that's the highest way of demonstrating value. I do like what Yvonne's saying in the middle here, because it's very difficult to do a strict ROI, return on investment analysis, that links a particular activity with a particular change of behavior in an organization. But it is possible to use anecdotes and case studies, which is what she's saying here in the middle. And to be honest, in most organizations, that's enough. It's enough to say, hey, we did this and we saw behavior change and it was valuable for us. People don't want to have to go through the whole dollar process of proving some form of very strict correlation. A story is usually more powerful even than that. Is that what you find, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. Soft analysis is where I think the exciting stuff is. It's how we know within your organization you can prove or disprove that. So I probably see the hard fact. So when you're talking to the person that perhaps is holding your budget, you will look at that lens of return on investment. Do I actually have people consuming this? Are they completing it? There's also some interesting statistics around completions now over sort of long form, short form modalities, that diversity of content that's hitting us, so that we've got lots of different, or I guess, different views of looking at that. When you look at the soft analysis, I think it's about understanding, are we seeing anything that happens on your engagement surveys? Are you seeing anything on those little touch points where people feel like they're being developed, that they know that you care? So, some of the points that you're saying there, Yvonne, about case studies and spotlights, that's really important, because that's really where I think the meat is here, because we can look at understanding what's working for those end users on our platforms. Let's have a little look at what we saw recently and what we were seeing come through in some of the trends analysis that we did. Again, with 100 million users, we start to really get an understanding of the landscape, and this will be done at the highest level. So what I tended to do is look at what I was seeing as growth trends 2022 versus 2021, and there were 3 clear winners. Not surprisingly, we'd asked questions on these earlier. You're confirming some of that stuff as well. I get that role specific is still up there, it's the top box, but that can be sometimes a little bit more difficult for us to identify a generic trend. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, DEIB as we often refer to it. 7.7 times increase in demand for self-directed DEIB content. Some of the things that we were seeing is the fact that you were wanting to start creating a much more inclusive workplace. There are people that were saying that they needed to offer this content from a client's perspective. They wanted to make sure that they were ticking a box and making sure that they were staying compliant. That can be part of it in this world, but it was also, we were seeing people being self-directed. That tells us people are interested in this content. They want to consume it if you make it available. So for those organizations that were choosing to offer a suite of DEIB content, that was the type of content that people were going in to your systems and platforms and finding for themselves. They wanted to go in there, they wanted to consume it, they wanted to learn about this. What do we think will happen with that? So people are reimagining the people experience. They do want to satisfy a compliance box, and absolutely that takes its place, but they're also looking then that perhaps there could be an after effect of that. Do they need to reduce potential legal activity that may come as part of that? But this is also about how do we increase, I'll get my teeth in, employee retention, making the right content available to show how inclusive you're being as an organization is really key. Health and well-being, 1.4 increase in demand. Again, for some titles like desk yoga, guided meditation, nutrition, sleep. We went through an awful lot of change in the pandemic, and people have identified that health and well-being is really crucial. And the number of organizations that are now offering this content has increased dramatically. Again, can be really important for employee engagement, also for the productivity of your teams. Again, much of the stuff that we were seeing in that space is self-directed. So again, making it available, let people find this for themselves. It's not necessarily a compliance topic we push out to people. It's pull. People are coming in and experiencing this. There's also some research that says that this can be doing things like improving your bottom line as a business overall. That would be key to show from a business driver and a return on investment. And then the third big topic was sustainability. So 100% increase in this area. So your environmental and social governance. Again, really interesting research going on out there. So Yale University did a survey. I think it was 2,000 students who said they would rather take a pay cut and a lower salary and work for an environmentally responsible company. So again, it's having impact across the line. Those are 3 areas. There are more, and I would be remiss in not plugging that I will do a deep dive analysis of this. Sorry, Mark, for just getting that one in there, but we do a deep dive on content investment trends on the 7th of March at 3 p.m. Please come in and we will look at that content data in much more detail.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Good job. There's some questions in there, Don. I think we'll come back to them at the end if we can.
Yeah, we're going to have rich discussion around some of these points that have been brought up, but let's keep going with the presentation for now.
Okay, then we have a Q&A session at the end. We'll grab some of those at the back of the call. So good stuff. So second part of this session really is around data, skills, and ultimately, what we do with that data. So Don, first, maybe ask yourself, what do you see happening currently within organizations around skills data specifically?
I think there's a lot that's been talked about for a while now around this. Let me turn my camera on so that I'm not just a voice in nowhere. There's lots that people have been talking about this for a while. I added skills-based talent management to the Global Sentiment Survey last year, but that was on the basis of having seen this bubbling under for a while. The drivers are that it's a tighter labour market, even though we have unemployment. There's a tighter labour market for certain skills, and you want to hold on to people. And that means that employers are looking to provide mobility internally and to make sure they don't lose the tacit knowledge, the cultural understanding, the fit that employees have. So rather than this absurd business of people leaving and joining a general pool, the talent pool is being seen as both external and internal. And organizations like Deutsche Post DHL are doing that in Germany. It's explicitly trying to raise the number of people they're employing from, I think it was 50%, which is a very high number already, up to, I think, something like 75%, which is extraordinary there, and doing a good job with it. But you can only do that effectively and make it part of what you do to get the best value out of all the effort you put into it. If the information you've got around people's skills and what they do is not simply dialed into one thing, the retention or the recruitment, but is the plumbing that works for everything, so that retention, recruitment, training, succession planning, workforce planning, all of these things run off that same common language of skills throughout the organization. It's something we've been hoping to do in our field for about 15 years. I think finally the technology has caught up with it. The idea that you've got this language of skills spread throughout the organization that enables you to really understand what you've got in your people, rather than simply treating them as inconvenient packages and bundles of skills you have to move around. That's a rather long answer to your question, Mark. But
yeah, I would agree.
I've been waiting for this moment for years. I'm delighted it's come.
It's an interesting, definitely an interesting topic. We had a recent UK conference. There's like 350 clients in the room, and I think that one of our VPs asked, hands up everybody who has a skills strategy, and everybody's hands went up. And then keep your hand up if you've executed on that skill strategy, and everybody's hand went down very quickly. So look, it's definitely linked to data critically, but as I say, skills will become part of the next part of this session. So thank you for that. One of the areas that I think, I'll let you digest a couple of these these points here. We're going to focus around internal mobility for the next 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. So as I say, I'll let you digest a couple of those internal points. So like a great example of capturing return on investment in learning is evaluating the impact of people. So how that has improved in terms of retention is a really good metric that you can measure. So that metric of retention is a lever against business performance. As simple as the better people you keep, the higher business performance that you have. And someone that works in a highly charged sales environment, we have to keep our best people because our performance will drop off the back of it if we lose them. So we are super focused on the internal mobility piece. We also know, and I also know, the cost of replacing that person. So I think, as you said earlier, tens of £1,000s, I think it's like 2x their salary is the cost of retaining an individual. So career mobility is something, when you have the data and the technology to manage that career development conversation, that's definitely a major lever of positioning return on investment around learning. So good timing. I met a large police force yesterday, a client of ours, who are really laser focused on this. So worryingly, or not worryingly, they have a really aging workforce at this organization. They mentioned to me that, and I thought I'd tell you this anecdotally, I think it's definitely apt in terms of employee retention and mobility. The average sergeant stays within that police force now for 5 years, whereas previously it was 25 years. So you can see the obvious challenges that they have in regard to managing tacit knowledge and experience when they have such a high turnover of staff within that particular rank of policemen. So, they have an urgent request to use an organization such as Cornerstone to boost that employee retention. And it's a route it is going to be a route that we're going to double down and drill down on today in terms of internal mobility and how that ultimately can impact ROI.
Mark, I've got a question from Chris, which I have to pass on. Where have these figures come from? Are we able to say where the 82 times and 65% come from?
Yes, so it's just some of Deloitte, some Mercer, and the last one is the Mercer, Deloitte, and there's another one. I will put in the chat at the end of this session if we have time. So
there we go. Thank you.
Yeah, all good third-party organisations that have ran those cases. So yeah, third parties. So let's continue with the theme of return on investment through retention of your people. So very quickly, so Cornerstone over the last number of years have gathered, I think, something like 3 billion lines of data, both publicly and privately, over that short period. We've distilled that data into clustering, filtering, and curation that is effectively taking all of those skills mapped to a role. What we've now created is effectively a skills graph, which is now accessed by our customers. So all that the skills graph needs to have is the job title of the individual. And the more information that you have around that job title, the more skills that will be detected by the AI in the machine that allows you to see, for example, things around proximity. So in the example on the page, you have somebody that is maybe of that skill, but the solution and the skills graph will recommend synonyms of skills that we think would be recommended for that person. So the detection works with new skills, and obviously is continually suggesting and tagging those new skills, which is related to ultimately learning. And then if you think about the case and the user study, which is matching job opportunities and career paths against those skills that the individual may or may not have. So what we then hear is obviously lots of organizations that effectively then really struggle that when they have the data, in this example, we have skills, what do we do with it, right? It's clear and concise data, but you have the skills gap of what you want to do with your employees. But then you have, a big question mark, as we discussed earlier, is what effectively to do with it. So in the example on the page here, you have skills that are shown, skills that you might have based on the skills graph, and ultimately then a skills gap. So this individual, he wants to be a design manager, as you can see at the top of the page, and the gap that they have in the skills to do that role is clearly shown to the employee. Now, if you think about that for your own organization, what you're creating then is effectively a route for them to grow their career within your organization using that internal mobility and the costs associated with it. If you then take maybe a level down in terms of what you then can visualize is this people matrix, the managers being able to see things like training completion data really then allow you to see, and the employee to see, who is best qualified for that particular role. It's nice and visual, and the user can see what opportunities that they have in terms of facilitating change or gap analysis for them to do something slightly different within the organization. So I think that's quite a cool thing to show your employees. And then you have these capability matrix here at the top, which is another good example of really critical data that allows people to drive their own careers. And as we've discussed, if you can do that, and we'll share the Mercer data, there's that 2x multiplier to retain that person, and the return on investment, as you can see, is obviously fairly clear. And again, just to double down and dug down into that, the qualification matrix against the people matrix then shows against the specific roles, the user's capabilities in regard to what gap that they have and the expectations of that particular role. So it's by giving the users that data, they can then take control of their own destiny and ultimately stay within their organization as opposed to, as you say, going to the competitor or somewhere else. So then that's probably something that I would ask you probably to double down in regard to the return on investment around attrition within your workforce, being able to prove that. So just before we go back to Don, I thought it might be interesting just to share some data within Cornerstone. So this is a chart on the page that shows the searches within the previous 6 months here at Cornerstone, and the method of, and this is the important piece here, the method of search of how these individuals are searching within Cornerstone. So for me, the interesting piece actually is not the searches, it's actually the method of the search. So also think about when you're looking at return on investment is learning in the flow of work. So at the top, and you might miss it, it says Slack there in green as a method of search. How I would read that as a leader here at Cornerstone is that that's a really damning evidence of people not using learning in the flow of work in the office where to consume learning and to consume training. The return on investment of utilizing and accessing data in the flow of their activity in the day is obviously fairly proven to reduce that time to learn. So I think that's one really interesting facet of things maybe to review, how you're consuming, accessing content in the flow. And then me personally, for somebody that learns visually, again, think about how you share the declared skills of certain individuals here at Cornerstone again. So again, it allows your talent teams here within Cornerstone to identify maybe, the opportunities that they have to enhance their skills. And obviously when you double click on the square, it brings up a little bit more details around the specific learning. And as said, someone that learns visually, this is a much easier method for me to consume and deploy. So a couple of good examples of how to share skills. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm conscious there's probably a couple of questions in the Q&A, Don. So maybe we'll spend a short moment on that.
Have we lost Don?
We have lost Don, I think.
Okay, so I was.
No, it's all right. Don was on mute. Don was on mute, which of course is the mantra of our times. I'm very pleased. I almost managed to get through to the end of January without making that mistake. But hey,
one of us had to, right?
We're all human, aren't we? Okay, so on the left-hand side, a bunch of stuff. The trends report, which is you've got the QR code at the top, and underneath that, underneath in the main box, you've got the link to download the report. Chris, you're asking about where those numbers came from. It was primarily, I think, they're referenced in the Cornerstone and Lighthouse Research 2023 talent mobility study. I'm just putting the link to that right now into the bottom of that resource area on the left-hand side. So there we are. We've got some resources to jump into. Lots of stuff here. I'd like to just quickly ask about the data that you've got around occupations and skills. Claire asked the question: how have you defined the skills in your skills graph? I mean, it's a huge question. How have you defined them? Does it use something like the existing ONET ontology? ONET being the US dictionary, if you like, or taxonomy of jobs and skills associated with them. So where does the information come from for the skills graph, Mark? D.
So that the original mode of capturing those skills came from an acquisition that we made about 3 years ago, which was a really cool French organization called Clustery. What they had done really smartly is gained access before all of the doors were closed on LinkedIn and other third-party solutions. Is they took that data. As part of that exercise, they were able to manipulate all of those lines, and as I say, the hundreds of millions of lines of data with some sophisticated scientists to present back that data. So the original source of it was the marketplace. In terms of the actual technology in the background that's doing all of the heavy lifting, you're talking to the wrong person to answer that question.
So the point is this effectively to use the terminology that's often used. It's a folksonomy. In other words, it's gathered from existing. It reflects the reality of how things are being done and how it's reflected through LinkedIn, rather than a centralized view of what things should be from a central body. So that's the answer declared to you. Erica's got Edcast by Cornerstone.
It will be. Erica, thumbs up on that. That'll be exactly the same for yourself. That's an easy one for a yes.
You've got the contact details from Mark DeBone on the left-hand side. He said it. He said it. It's going to be all right. You can get hold of him on LinkedIn. He can't get away now.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do that.
Claire also asks, if ROI is partly about solving business problems like staff retention, what are the key business problems that you see most often? And are there different types of L&D programs or approaches you'd recommend for each of these? So I think this is actually a very good general question. In your work, going out talking to clients, do you see clusters of similar problems which have similar solutions for them in terms of L&D or in terms of data, in fact?
Yeah, so I could pick this one up, and I was looking at that earlier on. So, Claire, great question. I'll try and give the broadest answer here, because I think it's one you'd have to deep dive into more. Yes, things like staff retention are really key. What I tend to see here is there's two approaches within the world, and again, I look at it through that e-learning content lens. That the skills, the data, the retention, everything that I'm looking for is, I guess, going back to one of the old methodologies. I'm looking at what do we use for push and pull. There will be a mixture of resources that people will use to keep people compliant. It's absolutely key. We have to continue to do that. But we also see that user engagement piece, and we need to look at how people then use our platforms, our technology to go and find the data that they're looking for, the courses that they're looking for. So I'd written down that you were going to look at a mixture of push and pull, role-based and wider soft skills. You would need to think about some of those trending data points, because that adds value to the employee's experience with learning. So you would look at things like DEIB or sustainability. Perhaps you might do health and mental wellness, because the idea is you're driving enough education to drive somebody's role, to increase their skills, but you're also providing some choice. So it's quite a broad answer, but there are lots of different ways we see that happening. And I think it's probably around the diversity of the content that you're making available and the format in which you're making it available that's really important here.
Sorry, Mark, do you look like you're about to say something?
No, I'm okay. Mark said it perfectly. I'm conscious we've only got a couple of moments. So,
Erica asks, will you share your slides? Yes, and the recording will. Well, you said you'll share them, and of course, as we say, we've got the contact details on the left-hand side there, so you can absolutely chase the guys down for it. Plus, the recording is available, and the link for the recording is there, and you'll get an email tomorrow morning about that as well. We also had this question about, is there a difference in measurement between compliance training and other skills development? I think that there is a lot to that question, trying to be concise about it. Okay. How do we measure the effectiveness of what we're doing in compliance versus other forms of objectives of training, and are they fundamentally different, or can we treat them in the same way?
They're fundamentally different. We can. There are companies that will all look at this they will treat it in the same way. I would tend to break it down. I would tend to look at, first of all, the data that you can gain and how you read and interpret that data. Mm-hmm. If you're including compliance data, you will know it's skewed in a particular way. Again, goes back to what I'd said with, actually it was Claire's question previously. I tend to break it down into the pull-push training and look at what is self-directed and is increasing people's skills on the basis of them wanting to consume data for themselves, and sometimes breaking away the overall compliance data. I guess it would be, you would expect that if you're pushing out content that needs to be completed by a week on Friday, or I'll ping an email to your manager, that those completion rates will be significantly higher. So it's about understanding the data you can collect, breaking it down, and if it's collective, looking at how it might potentially be skewed. So that's, I think, probably an answer to that one in part, Dom.
Right. It sounds comprehensive. Mark D, was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think the only thing to add is, look, if you think about the heavy regulatory requirements of some of the pharmaceutical industries, their measurements cannot be anything other than 100%, right? So it's fairly black and white. So you're either compliant to do a job or you're not, and if you're not, then you
don't do it.
Try again. So that's a fairly hard and fast measurement. So in those really regulated industries, it is a black and white answer, unfortunately. Whereas some organisations might have a slightly different approach in regard to compliance, but it's definitely black and white in that vertical as a real basic example.
Earlier on, thank you. Earlier on, Alex was asking, was making the point that, I don't know if Alex is a he or a she, but was that they were using data to drive apprenticeships and growth in learning and develop teams, which I think is really interesting and actually quite a complex thing to do. Is there anything that you'd like to, and have you seen people using data around apprenticeships? And if so, have you got any tips to pass on?
My biggest tip would be find people that are running similar programs. I was really fortunate in a previous life to be quite involved in an apprenticeship program. Alex, if you want to reach out, I can put you in contact with some other people. Data is key to that and how you drive that. Apprenticeship programs in themselves are of huge interest, but it's around connecting with people and comparing similar ideas. Would be very happy to pick that one up offline rather than go naming names here and in the wider audience, but I'm sure I can put you in touch with a few people.
Excellent.
Apprenticeships always, everyone's, when you look at them from the outside, they are a good idea. They also seem from the outside terribly simple, and as soon as you get into them, you realize that's how complex they are. And data as a guiding star, and also as a way to check you're on route, is a great idea. I think we're just about getting ready to wrap up now. Is there anything that you wanted to add, Mark D, as you appear on my screen in front of me? Anything you wanted to add to the audience before we wrap up?
So only just a final plug, and I'll go on, Mark. Mark L, go on. You know me better. You go first.
So I was going to say, download the Trends Report. It makes great reading. It's really interesting. We will do a theme. We will do a range of themes on this. Come and listen to some of those webinars. Come and take part. Be part of the conversation. We learn a lot from you. So it would be really good if you could do that. Mr. De Bono, over to you.
Yeah, no, I was just going to double down on the Trends Report. But hey, look, I really enjoyed this today. I think the interaction has been really good. We were unsure whether the polls and the interaction would work, but I think it's been a big thumbs up. So thank you for your efforts.
You always get a great, smart, chatty audience with the Learning Technologies crowd.
Absolutely. Tick, tick, tick.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mark for bringing your expertise and your view on this really important topic to the crowd. And everyone in the room, thank you very much for your participation, your thoughts, sharing everything, your questions, your resources today. It's been really helpful. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Mark and Mark to stick around for a second, and I'm going to then just ask everyone, I'm just going to point everybody to the door, metaphorically speaking. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope to see you in 2 weeks' time for our next webinar.